Hey everybody, so we're going to take a look here at the DeckTech for the Flashback deck I built for my miniseries on puremtgo.com. For those of you who are not familiar, I'm taking a look at popular spell mechanics that have been given to us in Magic, and trying to see if I can build decks that focus on these mechanics and do so within a budget. So this is the look at Flashback. It is kind of, I admit it feels a little hypocritical doing green and blue, but it is just such a perfect color combination for this that you cannot deny it. Now we got a lot of in many ways, time spiral and random cards here and there, and most importantly in the newest set, the Innistrad block, has given us some great self-mill options as well as flashback cards. So we, together with the old school cards and the new school cards, you can really put together quite a deck. There's a lot of options. I wanted to play around with black and blue as well, but the green version just comes off that much better because, you really get the win condition out of these token generators. But let's get to that in a second. So right here we have, it's a very creature-like deck. You are going to be counting on your tokens to win it, but you really have to find a way to get them in the graveyard. Not all of them, but most of them are going to come at a bigger cost to flashback than they do to play the first time. You look at Crush of the Worms here, and it's going to cost 3 more colorless to flash it back. The only exception to that being Roar of the Worm. Now, Roar of the Worm is kind of your best card. It costs 7 to play it free out, but to flash it back is going to cost you only 4. So that's really your ideal spell. Deep Analysis is another one like that. It does cost an additional 3 life, but it only costs 2 mana to flash it back. So there are occasional cards that we have gotten where the flashback cost is actually cheaper than the regular one, and that's kind of your biggest and most baddest cards are those kind of things. So let's take a look first of all at our ability to get cards into the graveyard. The first is going to be Mulch, and this was a new card that was printed with the newer set and the newer, kind of self-mill and graveyard stuff they were playing with. It allows you to mana ramp, but at the same time it is throwing cards into your graveyard for that flashback ability. I had considered putting in, options for, there is the artifact that reduced the cost of flashback spells, but I just could not find room for it. If you play this deck and you want to, maybe take out the Moment's Peace, I guess if I was going to make a change, that's where it would be. You could take out the Moment's Peace and bring in the artifact that does that. To reduce the cost on some of these. But anyways, well, okay, never mind. Mulch, great card, land fetch, throws to the grave. Next up on the list is Careful Study. This is a fantastic card, used a lot in Storm and stuff like that. Reprinted recently in red as Faithless Looting, and that has a flashback as well. But draw 2 cards, discard 2 cards. This will allow you to easily pitch cards that you have in your hand. So you have Roar of the Worms, and you really want to pitch that away. That's a great thing to be able to do that with. It also helps you get rid of a handful of land and trade those land cards in your hand for something more useful. Next up we are brought in 2 of the scabs. The first is Screeching Scab. 2/1 for 2 that when it comes into play you put the top 2 cards of your library into your graveyard. And the Armored Scab is a 1/4 for 3 that puts the top 4 cards into the graveyard. Those are your basic spells for kind of filling your grave with these flashback cards. And definitely the Mulch is a very important one out of all of those because you want to be able to ramp up your mana to be able to play these much bigger spells, like Crush of Worms later on. Next on the list, kind of part of that is the Civilized Scholar. It works basically as the looter. It costs 1 more. Draw a card, discard a card. This allows you to really be able to search through your deck pretty nicely, and if you do get the opportunity to discard, these are nice cards to have, but playing a whole bunch of these, if you played all 6 is overkill. So having the Scholar and being able to chuck one of these away is definitely a great thing. It turns it into this 5/1 Brute that you can swing and hit your opponent pretty hard. The Brute is a great thing, but you have to attack with it. If you don't, it flips back to being the Scholar. Like I said, it's definitely a nice addition to kind of not only sort through your cards, but at the same time it allows you to kind of away these cards that you don't want on, if you get to that mid to late game and you don't want to be milling out as much because you've already milled a lot, then that's a great thing to do. The deep analysis is, the obvious choice for card draw. I'm only running 2 of it in this deck because it is not a cheap card, and it's really going to affect the budget of this deck. So it's only a 2 of, but it is, if you have the cards, feel free to add more of those. It's going to be a fantastic card because of the fact that it's cheaper to flash it back than it is to play it. Another interesting thing we got in Innistrad, playing with these, is this Runic Repetition. Return an exiled card with Flashback to your hand. Now, Flashback is a mechanic that you can play a spell from a graveyard for the Flashback cost, and when you do, that spell is removed from the game. So with Runic Repetition, you can use that removed from game card and put it back into your graveyard, and it allows you to flash it back again. So, say you use Roar of the Worm, you flash it back for the 4, and it's removed from game, then you can play the Runic Repetition, and that goes back into your graveyard, and you can replay it for another one. Basically giving you just an extra copy of that spell in your graveyard. The next thing I want to talk about is the Grisly Fate. We talked a lot about Roar of the Worm. It's going to be your biggest token generator. But Grisly Fate is another one that I think is really great in this deck, and I put it in because of the Threshold. Flashback and Threshold and Madness kind of all go so well together because they all want you to discard and fill your grave. They were all released kind of around the same time, and they really interact incredibly well with each other. I tried not to. It's very hard to keep it focused on just one of those. I'm trying to keep this focused on the Flashback, but it's very easy to overlap into Threshold and Madness because you get stuff like the Root Wallet, which can be discarded for 0, and stuff like Careful Study. So if you see, when I get to the, I am building a Threshold deck, and when you see that, it's going to kind of start being some of the same cards because they just work so perfectly together. Grisly Fate is one that I really like for this deck because it not only has Flashback, but it has the Threshold as well. So it enables me to keep to the theme, and at the same time it works really well to, bolster it. This card is kind of inexpensive for 2 bear tokens, but when you have Threshold, it puts 4 of those tokens into play. And with this deck and the self-mill, Threshold is very easy to accomplish. So that's why I think this was, kind of your next great card to have in the deck, because of the fact that it allows you to pull off that Threshold almost 100% of the time because of, you're throwing cards to the grave for the Flashback and etc., etc. Let's see. The other creature token generator I have is Crush of Worms. I don't know, maybe this is a bad choice. You can feel free to make a change on this, but this is a personal favorite. It's an old school favorite. It is very expensive, costs 9 to cast, but you get 3 6/6 worm tokens, and the Flashback on it is even higher, coming in at 9 and 3 green. It's the 6/6 creature is something usually hard for an opponent to deal with, just straight up, and getting multiples of those is always a plus. So it's I don't know, like I said, you can feel free to change it, but that is a personal favorite of mine. Next up, we have the Parallel Evolution. This is another one that is fantastic, but at a minimum because of the high cost of the card itself. This is going to be kind of your bomb of the deck. For each creature token on the battlefield, its controller puts another copy of that creature token. So, say you did Crush of the Worms, you now have 3 6/6 worm tokens, and then you follow it up with Parallel Evolution. All of a sudden, now you have 6 6/6 worm tokens. So it's going to be a bomb. It's going to multiply all of your worms. Here you get the 4 bear tokens, you play Evolution, and now you have 8 bear tokens. So it's definitely going to be your kind of your big bomb card, enabling you to get those extra creature tokens into play. Now, kind of filling out some of the blanks here, I brought in 4 copies of Counterspell because, again, I know I'm looking at a lot of green and blue in these decks, but you really don't have options for creature removal. You can bring an artifact and enchantment removal, but it's hard to do because, trying to fill out the mechanics, and that's not really kind of an ideal thing. Bringing the counterspells allows you to deal with big threats before they enter the field. I mean, once they hit the field, you're kind of working off the aggro strategy where your big creatures are needed to be the control for their big creatures. You're going to use attacking with a 6/6 worm token and trying to force them to block in order to save themselves as your means of creature control. So I brought in the counterspells to help kind of balance that out and deal with it. I think the last card in here is the Moment's Peace, perhaps the weakest card in this. The point of the Moment's Peace was originally, because this deck is occasionally very mana intensive, especially on some of these bigger flashback cards. When you're self-milling, you will get these in, and it does present a bit of a downside to you because they cost more from your graveyard. So that's kind of a hindrance to this deck, and you're like, oh well, that's pretty stupid. But at the same time, you want to be able to do that to kind of enable the Roar of Worms and the Grisly Fate, which are going to be kind of your bigger plays anyways. So you really kind of need to stall at some points in time in order to get the mana base you need to be able to play these spells. So the point of the Moment's Peace was to be able to do that, to keep your opponent, if they're attacking through, you can play the Moment's Peace from your hand or from your graveyard if it's self-milled, in order to, basically skip their attack and give you an extra turn to try and hit that mana drop, and really balance that out. So I hope you definitely give this deck a chance. Feel free to play around with some of the card choices. I know this one was kind of pushing to the top of the budget, but I think it's definitely worthwhile. Keys to remember are the fact that Mulch is definitely one of your MVPs because you need that extra mana. Parallel Evolution is your bomb, hands down, and don't end up playing all 6 of these scabs, or you may find yourself totally decking. But there you go. I hope you enjoy the deck. Give it a try. Check out the example game and all the other decks in the series.